A Danish English foreign policy update on the fight for Greenland, as Trump frames the potential choice between Greenland and NATO and how geopolitics is affecting financial markets. Greetings and welcome to Danish Info News TV. Stay informed with concise, up-to-date coverage of the Greenland-NATO situation. Last updated 8th of January of 2026. Latest developments, markets. Shares in Greenland-Banken have surged amid the political uncertainty. Plus 36% from 2nd to the 8th of January. Plus 7.21% in a single trading day. According to Nordnet's Pierre Hansen, the rise is clearly linked to Trump's Greenland statements, driven by expectations of potential US investment and short-term speculative momentum. Now to politics, diplomacy. Denmark's ambassador to the US, Jesper Møller Sørensen, has held meetings in Congress and also is meeting officials at the White House, accompanied by Greenland's representative Jakob Isbosetsen. The effort signals intensified Danish-Greenlandic coordination aimed at dialogue and de-escalation. De-escalation signals. Former Foreign Minister Anders Samuelsen urges restraint, stressing that US law 2023 prevents a president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO and that there is no alliance majority for fragmentation. He advised avoid escalation and stay focused on diplomacy. Let's look at what happened so far. Recent statements by US President Donald Trump regarding Greenland have intensified tensions across the transatlantic alliance. Interviews and reporting from DR, TV2, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and Reuters indicate that the United States is actively considering pathways to gain control over Greenland, primarily through economic inducements framed as an attractive integration into the US system, with military force described as last resort but not ruled out. European leaders, led by Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, have rejected any notion that Greenland is for sale and emphasized NATO principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The controversy has risen a stark dilemma framed by Trump himself, a potential choice between Greenland and NATO. Background and timeline. Renewed US interest in Greenland. Over the past year, President Trump has repeatedly stated his desire for US control or ownership of Greenland, citing national and psychological imperatives tied to security and success. Recent escalation. In interviews with the New York Times, Trump suggested that the US might be forced to choose between preserving NATO and securing Greenland, asserting that NATO is essentially ineffective without the United States. Regional security context. Trump has claimed that the Arctic security is insufficient and pointed to Chinese and Russian activity around Greenland as a justification for US involvement. US position. Strategic framing. Trump emphasizes ownership as crucial, arguing that legal agreements or leases cannot substitute for territorial control. The Arctic is portrayed as a growing theater of great power competition, elevating Greenland's strategic value. Policy options under consideration. According to DR's US correspondent Kim Bølsø and US media reports. Economic and political incentives. US officials are working on plans to make integration with the US economically attractive for Greenlanders, with the aim that they would prefer US affiliation. Diplomatic routes. Reports suggested discussions with Congress about purchasing Greenland from Denmark. Military action. While downplayed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and seen as unlikely in the short term, the White House has stated that military force is always an option for the commander-in-chief. Notably, neither American nor European officials report concrete signs of preparations for military invasion. Danish and Greenlandic response. Sovereignty and self-determination. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has consistently stated that Greenland belongs to its people and is not for sale. Greenland has expressed a desire to remain Greenlandic, not to become part of the United States. 3 key points from Mette Frederiksen's interviews. In a series of interviews with DR, Mette Frederiksen significantly sharpened her rhetoric following renewed statements by President Trump about Greenland. Her remarks underline how seriously Denmark views the situation. First, a NATO breaking red line. Frederiksen drew a clear boundary regarding alliance cohesion. If the United States choose to attack another NATO country, then everything stops. While she did not specify the concrete consequences of such a rupture, she emphasized that an attack on a NATO ally would fundamentally undermine the alliance, the rule-based international order, and decades of shared security assumptions. She acknowledged uncertainty about how such a crisis would unfold, but stressed that Denmark and Europe cannot abandon their democratic values or acceptance of borders, even if others do. Second, unacceptable pressure on Greenland. Frederiksen described Trump's repeated and shifting statements about Greenland as deliberate pressure. She characterized the US pressure as unacceptable pressure and an unreasonable attack on the international community. According to the Prime Minister, the Greenland issue has been serious from the outset and should be taken literally. Trump wants control over part of the Danish realm. Her position is unequivocal. Greenland does not wish to be American, and no external power has the right to decide its future. Third, security addressed within NATO. Security is being addressed within NATO. Frederiksen rejected claims that Denmark and NATO are failing in the Arctic. She stressed that Denmark has been a reliable ally and that Greenland itself is part of NATO. Arctic security, including concerns about Russian and Chinese activity, is being strengthened within agreed NATO frameworks and with respect for sovereignty. Security commitments. Denmark argues that Arctic security is being addressed within existing NATO frameworks. Investments include at least 42 billion Danish krone allocated to Arctic and North Atlantic defense agreements, alongside deployments of F-35 fighter jets. The US already maintains a military base at Pituffik, enabled by a 1951 agreement that allows broad US military freedom while respecting Danish sovereignty. NATO and Europe. European leaders have rallied behind Denmark, reaffirming respect for borders and sovereignty. Denmark and 6 major NATO countries have signed a joint declaration stating that decisions about Greenland's future rest solely within Greenland and Denmark. The concern in Europe is not an imminent US withdrawal from NATO, but rather erosion of trust and predictability if US pressure continues. Analysis: NATO versus Greenland. Trump's framing of choice between NATO and Greenland introduces a false dichotomy but highlights deeper tensions. Alliance cohesion versus unilateralism. NATO's credibility rests on collective defense and respect for sovereignty. Unilateral US action against an ally would shatter this foundation. Security interests already accommodated many US strategic objectives in Greenland. Military presence, freedom of movement, Arctic monitoring can be achieved within existing agreements. Psychological versus legal control. Trump's emphasis on ownership suggests a personal and symbolic dimension that goes beyond conventional security logic. The risk is not immediate conflict, but a prolonged period of strategic instability, where ambiguity itself undermines deterrence and alliance unity. Latest developments. Market reactions. Greenland bank shares surge. The geopolitical tension is now visibly affecting financial markets. Shares in Grønlandsbanken, Greenland's main bank, have surged sharply in the first days of the year. From January 2nd to January 8th, the share price rose by 36%. On Thursday alone, the stock gained 7.21%. According to investment economist Pierre Hansen Nordnet, the surge is definitely about Donald Trump. Investors appear to be reacting in two ways. Some anticipate that increased US interest or investment could boost the Greenlandic economy, making Grønlandsbanken an attractive proxy investment. Others are driven by short-term momentum, betting that sustained media attention and geopolitical speculation will continue to fuel gains. Hansen notes that the more Greenland dominates headlines, the stronger the speculative appeal may become, suggesting volatility could persist as long as the political uncertainty continues. Intensified diplomacy. Denmark engages. Washington. Diplomatic activity has escalated in response to the escalating rhetoric. Denmark's ambassador to the United States, Jesper Møller Sørensen, has held meetings in both the Senate and the House of Representatives over 2 consecutive days to discuss Greenland. He is also scheduled to meet officials at the White House, accompanied by Greenland's representative in Washington, Jakob Isbosætsen. The coordinated Danish-Greenlandic presence underscores a joint front emphasizing dialogue, sovereignty, and alliance management. Calls for de-escalation. Former Danish Foreign Minister Anna Samuelsen has urged calm amid the turbulence. He rejects the premise that there can be a real choice between Greenland and NATO, stressing that US law passed in 2023 prevents a president from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO without a 2/3 majority in Congress or parallel legislation in both chambers. Samuelsen argues there is no majority within NATO for fragmentation and warns against overreacting to rhetorical pressure. His advice is clear: pursue dialogue, avoid escalation, and do not respond to every provocative statement, an approach he believes strengthens Denmark and NATO's position. Outlook. Short-term, heightened diplomatic engagement, market volatility linked to headlines, and continued rhetoric pressure from Washington. Medium-term, potential US economic initiatives or proposals framed as partnerships rather than acquisitions, further NATO coordination on Arctic security. Long-term, the Greenland issue risks becoming a structural fault line in transatlantic relations unless managed through restraint, clear red lines, and alliance cohesion. Key takeaway: the Greenland dispute has now moved beyond diplomacy into markets and alliance politics. While rhetoric suggested dramatic choices, institutional constraints, allied unity, and deliberate de-escalation efforts may yet prevent a rupture, provided all parties resist turning strategic ambiguity into irreversible confrontation. For more updates and breaking news on NATO, Greenland, and international affairs, Subscribe to Danish Info News TV. Stay informed, stay ahead.